dad, he did a lot of consulting work for the government on, I guess you would call it, biological warfare systems. He was involved in releasing, viruses, rhinoviruses and flus, various types of flus in subways. I asked him, I said, Dad, people died. Old people with pre-existing conditions died. And he said, casualties of war. I said, what war? I had enough information to sink a lot of people in Washington, including the then Vice President of the United States, Herbert Walker Bush, and who was directly involved with everything that was going on. Also, he just kind of slid under the radar, by the way. He had a get out of jail card, I'll put it that way. When the plane taxied and finally stopped, I looked out the window and I shook my head and I turned around to Esther. And I said, my God, the Prime Minister's out there. What am I supposed to say? I'm not prepared for this. And the first thing, apart from handing me my identity card, was he said, we can do the vaccination right here for you and your wife.
He offered you the vaccination. Wow.
Yeah, fucking 35 years in hell. Now you're going to fucking kill me right there. Okay, fine. Fucking execute me right there on the tarmac. And the videos that I saw coming out of Australia, I was so angry.
Welcome to another episode of Balaclava Rising. On Cafe Locked-Out tonight, we have a very special guest, one of my heroes. I'm a very big fan, Jonathan Pollard. Jonathan Pollard is a national hero in Israel. He gave crucial intelligence information that was critical to the security of Israel and the Jewish people. He passed that on from the United States to Israel, and he attracted the ire of the deep state, some very powerful people within the military-industrial complex, and Jonathan was punished for that quite severely. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on to our show tonight.
My pleasure.
Now, I'm curious to know, we know a lot about your life in incarceration, but I'm curious to know a little bit about your life leading up to that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm a what they call a faculty brat. My dad was a university professor. He did a lot of consulting work for the government on, I guess you would call it, biological warfare systems. He was an ardent Cold Warrior, and he, I wouldn't say he hated, but he had very, very deep suspicions of the biopharmaceutical industry. Having worked for them as a consultant on vaccine production, he once told me that contrary to what we all thought, the biopharmaceutical industry is in fact the oldest profession that exists at the very pejorative sense of the word, oldest. So I grew up with a real humanitarian father on one hand, and on the other hand, he was, as I said, an ardent Cold Warrior, and he was involved in releasing, viruses, rhinoviruses and flus, various types of flus in subways. I found this out later when I had clearances, and I asked him, I said, Dad, people died.
Wow.
What was the point of this? And he said, well, we had to see if the Soviets could use our subway systems to spread biological warfare agents. And I said, but people died. Old people with pre-existing conditions died. And he said, casualties of war. I said, what war? What war? And he said, the Cold War. So on the one hand, he was the most magnanimous person I'd ever met in my life. A true gentleman, a concerned scientist on the one hand, a very good doctor, a compassionate doctor. And on the other hand, cold-blooded. When it came to service for the country, cold-blooded. So, okay, I grew up with that dichotomy at home. We traveled around quite a bit. I've lived in, growing up, I was born and raised in Texas, so that should explain everything. Um, I spent time with my mom and dad in Cambridge, England, in Paris, in Prague, Tokyo, some time in Perth, in fact.
Oh, okay.
Didn't want
That's
to
interesting.
didn't want to leave. Ran into Fosters and Australian teenage girls, and I've
No one
never been
drinks
the same
Fosters here,
since.
by the way. It's a myth. Australians don't drink Fosters.
Don't tell me that. That's terrible. that's that's just really not nationalist. You should boost your national drink. Um, no, it was a wonderful experience for me to be exposed to all these different cultures, and to realize that as an American, um, we didn't have really the final word on the good life. There were many, many other countries that had an idea of what a good life should be. And it did not involve American style materialism. And that came as a great shock to me. We traveled around Africa quite a bit. My father was a consultant for the World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organization. Later, we were in Prague during the Prague Spring. And we were there when the Russians came in, the Soviets, Operation Danube. And my father had been asked to debrief the Czech scientists who had worked for the Soviet biological warfare program, Biopreparat, as it was called. And we had a blissful life there. I went to school there, in the American school, the diplomatic school. I had a lot of Czech friends. We lived right below the castle, the Hradčany, and it was idyllic. I mean, the city was a Baroque jewel. It hadn't really been destroyed during the Second World War, so it was intact, beautiful. So the Soviets came, and my father was taken away for interrogation by a former graduate student of his who happened to be a colonel in the KGB. Okay, no surprise. And I went out the back window to join my friends, Czech friends, down in Wenceslas Square. And it was interesting because the first Soviet soldiers in there were young types, Slavs, totally confused over what was going on. They were told they had come to liberate the Czechs from a fascistic government. And here are all these kids, they all spoke Russian, screaming and yelling at them and throwing paper balls at them. Go home, go leave us, we're fine. We want to be independent. So you could see the real confusion on their face. They left that night. So we all thought we won. Well, the next morning, there were new troops that came in. They were Asiatic troops, and they didn't speak Russian. And they started killing people. This is how an empire runs, an empire.
That was the MO of the Soviets.
Exactly. So that was the first time I saw somebody killed. The kid next to me had his head blown off by a 12.7 millimeter Dushka round. There's nothing left. I mean, just here, there was nothing above. And I grew up doing a lot of hunting, so the blood and the gore, didn't, because I'm Texan, the blood and gore didn't shock me so much as the fact, and I know this is going to sound crazy, but I kept saying, wait, this is Prague. This is a city of culture. This is where Don Giovanni was first, performed. How is this happening here? But I snapped out of that very quickly. I mean, they were just hosing people down. So in the end, when we left a couple of days later, on the last civilian, that was a Lufthansa flight out of Prague, the pilot circled the city. It was on fire. Parts of it were on fire. And my father, again, he was always teaching me, looked at me and said, what have you learned from this? He had incredibly sad eyes. And I looked at him and I said, if you're weak, you die. He said, that's correct. That's correct. So on the one hand, I walked out of Dachau with a real chip on my shoulder against, well, non-Jews, I'll put it that way, and our own Jewish leadership that allowed so many of our own people to go to the gas chambers. And on the other hand, I saw kind of a Darwinistic view of society after Prague. So the weak will die unless they fight. Those were the lessons that I learned. Don't trust, put all your faith and trust in Hashem, in God, because everyone else is going to sell you out. That's what I learned from Dachau. When I went into the intelligence service, my father was dead set against it. He said, you don't have the character to put up with what you're going to see. He said, you're not a follower. You don't abide by rules very well. He said, I know with you growing up as a son, you don't follow rules very well. But he said, you're going to see things that will shock you. So I came out of graduate school in Cambridge, Harvard, MIT,
Wow.
the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, National Security Studies concentrate, and International Economics. And the first question I was asked as an intelligence officer with the other the intake class, was to pick a case study, review it, and write an assessment. So my luck, I picked blindly the Liberty incident. Okay, so I had access to the real information, and I wrote a report that concluded that it was a bona fide accident on the part of the Israelis
Can you
attacking
just give
that
a
ship.
brief summary of that incident, please? Just our viewers who aren't
Yeah,
aware.
the Liberty was an intelligence, Navy and National Security Agency crewed intelligence collector. It was a big converted merchant ship that was floating in harm's way during 1967 off the coast of Sinai. And they were just vacuuming up all kinds of information. And they had been warned repeatedly by the Israelis, back off. This is a war zone. And the problem was that there were several Egyptian assault transports that looked just like the ship. And it doesn't matter what flag you're flying. That doesn't mean anything in time of war. So there was a miscalculation. There was an accident. And the Israeli Air Force and Navy came out and really hammered the ship and nearly sank it. And there were, unfortunately, quite a few crew members that were killed and wounded. Okay, so I saw what happened. There's been a myth in the United States, especially in the military, that's been passed around that we attacked that ship on purpose in a calculated way because they knew something. I don't want to get into what they thought they knew, but it was something embarrassing for Israel. So that we were eavesdropping, for example, on communications between Cairo and Amman, whatever, and that it was used by Israel. Okay, I don't know what the problem with that was, but there was an accident. So it's taken on a mythology, an anti-Semitic mythology of its own over the years. So I did the assessments. I came up with, the answer that the facts suggested, and I presented the case. And my commander at the time, who was what we call a three-striper, a commander in the Navy, which is like a lieutenant colonel in the Army, I think, looked at me, and this is what he said: "Whose side are you on?" So I looked back at him and I said, "I'm on the side of truth. As an intelligence officer, we owe our primary allegiance to the truth, no matter where it goes. That's what we are sworn to provide the stakeholders in the executive and legislative branches the truth, no matter where it goes. And he said, I've got my eye on you. You don't understand how this works. Okay, good morning. I understood then what my father was warning me about, right? And it only got worse. So yes, the primary focus of my work was the Middle East, but I was also a member of another activity, I'll put it that way, an anti-terror activity. I don't want to go into, there are still statute of limitations in the United States on certain things that we did. I didn't think there was anything wrong in that. Because why? Well, we were the law. We didn't have to follow rules and regulations. We were the law. We wrote it. And we could abandon it and forget it pretty much anytime we wanted to, at will. And that's a dangerous idea to get through your head in a democracy, especially. You know, as an officer, an anti-terror officer especially, you have to be very careful about people's civil rights. And what we were doing basically tore up and dispensed with the notion of civil liberties. Okay, and it was comfortable. I mean, look, it's good to be in that position if you're on top.
The concept of civil liberties seems to be an illusion, and we saw that during COVID.
You know what's really funny? A lot of the Anglo-Saxon countries, United States, Canada,
the Five Eyes,
New Zealand, Australia, the Five Eyes groups. There's something about a British tradition, seriously, that's really frightening. The Brits ruled, I think, one of the largest non-contiguous empires next to Amazon and Kentucky Fried Chicken, ruled and McDonald's ruled one of the most amazing geographically dispersed empires of the world with a fist. I talked to several Kenyan graduate students when I was in graduate school, and I was horrified to find out what the Brits had done in Kenya in the 50s with concentration camps. And wow. It was horrible. I mean, they were brutal. This was a revelation to me. Look, I grew up in an Anglo-Saxon environment. The idea of civil liberties is a joke.
While we're on that topic, you said something interesting. I was trying to make small talk with you at the start, but you've led an extraordinary life, so I guess there's no such thing as small talk. Everything about your life is just extraordinary. But you said something at the very start that threw me off my chair. So just going back with the RSV viruses that were released, how long in your, if you have any insight, how long has this been going on for, and how often does this happen?
I hate to tell you this, but you're looking at the son of the scientists who in the 30s discovered RNA viruses. My pop did that. And I asked him once, this was when in the 60s, when I was, I'm 69. So, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you are right now. I asked him, well, what did you think? What was the first thing you thought when you discovered these things? At an Army laboratory, by the way, that was established for, well, whatever. And he said, first I was amazed. Just from a scientific standpoint, it was fascinating. But he said the first thing after that I thought of was, wow, we've got a potential weapon at our disposal. That was the first thing my wonderful father thought when he saw that. He later paid the price for his fascination because one of his technicians broke a bottle of something he was working on with RNA modified viruses. This was in the late 50s. And my pop was paralyzed on the left side of his body for about a year until he recovered. That was a first generation biowarfare agent. First generation. And that's what it did to him. What I grew up with and what I saw, I have to be careful in describing this because on the one hand, I understood that part of my father's work was defensive in nature. However, in order to defend against something, you have to develop an offensive version of it. And Dr. Mengele Fauci, as I call him, was very good at developing viruses at Wuhan, ostensibly to defend against them, but were horrible offensive agents that nobody, no human at least, had ever been exposed to before. You don't do that. Or if you're going to do that, you do it in a BSL 4 or 5 lab that my father ran, biological safety lab, with all kinds of protections and protocols and whatnot. And Fauci knew this gain of function work, bastard that he is, that he was paying for at Wuhan was a ticking time bomb. The French went in there and came out saying, my God, we have to shut it down. This place is going to be a disaster. They're not following any safety protocols. There was an American team that went in to Wuhan, came out almost within an hour and said, this is going to be Armageddon here. They knew. A few months before the first cases were reported of whatever, there was a simulation run at Johns Hopkins with Bill Gates, no surprise there, coming from, the family that he did.
Eugenics family.
Complete eugenics family. That simulated exactly what happened a few months later. Now, I don't want to go into conspiracy theories, but, sometimes coincidences can suggest more than just happenstance. I'll leave it at that. When you have the right biological agent, laid out the right responses from the government, laid out your assumptions for how the citizens would react, and lo and behold, what you see in reality down the line is exactly true to that simulation. Wow. That's pretty coincidental. And, whenever the World Economic Forum with Mr. Klaus is involved with anything, this guy is right at it. Yeah, he's right out of central casting. You couldn't even get this evil person,
with his German
Third
accent.
Reich type person, better cast than with this guy from the World Economic Forum. Okay, look, Esther, alayhi shalom, my wife, and I were in New York at the time. And I remember I was on parole.
During the COVID lockdowns.
Right. Well, this was before. I came out in 2015. Okay. So I remember walking down Fifth Avenue at the time. I had worked in New York before. I won't say exactly what we were doing, but it was for the government. Okay. It was for the betterment of society. And I just looked at her and I said, this place is going to burn. And she said, why do you say that? I said, it's just a feeling I have. Looking at what's around me right now, we're headed for a brick wall. Well, a year later, we had the Black Lives Matter riots. We had the Antifa riots. The city looked, I use this term advisedly, dystopian. That's what it looked like. And then this disease came up. And coming from the family that I do, I was very skeptical. And okay, we had to go through this insanity of hand sanitizing and masks and all this stupidity. I came from a medical family. I know the masks don't help at all. It's insane. It doesn't help. The quote virus was smaller. The diameter of the virus was smaller than the masks could block. So what are we doing? Virtue signaling? Yeah, well, I was uncomfortable with a mask. It was terrible. My wife was dying of cancer at the time. She could hardly breathe anyway. So I'm really wondering, where is this going when all of a sudden demonstrations for Black Lives Matter and Antifa with over 100,000 people, with no social distancing, no vaccination, no masks, no hand set, nothing, were allowed routinely.
It's miraculous.
And I said to myself, I got this. And sure enough, a couple of months into this thing, I finally realized what was going on. I had never seen, except in totalitarian societies, a public health crisis used to justify a power grab by various government entities. That's what this was all about on one level.
Would it be fair to describe it as a psyop?
PSYOP. I'm not quite sure, because I don't know at what level this was actually coordinated. I'm not sure. It could have been a private initiative that had government backing. And if you look at that simulation, you've got to go back and look at that simulation carefully at Johns Hopkins and see who was on or who was in the simulation. It was a who's who of who eventually later, sorry for sounding like an owl, who later basically took over the direction of the response to this scamdemic. And I'm calling it a scamdemic because that's what it was. You know, from a statistical standpoint or an epidemiological standpoint, if you look at the numbers of people who were, quote, diagnosed with COVID here going up, and you look at the people that were diagnosed previously with influenza, with all the other diseases, they were like this. There was almost a one-to-one correlation where you had those going down with influenza, that seasonal influenza, and those that were diagnosed with COVID. In New York, it was a joke. There was a guy that got run over by a bus. I mean, they had to pick him up, you know, his head, his arms. I mean, he just got mangled. And he died of COVID because when they tested him, they got $13,000, by the way. I thought that was kind of interesting. But they attributed his death, his cause of death, to COVID. Excuse me. The guy's arms, legs, head, you know, they're different parts of the stretcher. And I mean, he got dragged down the entire street, chopped up under the bus. But he died of COVID. And strange as it may seem, or ironically, my own wife here in Israel, the press published that she died of COVID complications. And that was a bloody, rotten lie. And I went and got the cause of her death. And it was murder for me to do this, but I got the cause of her death. And yes, she had Omicron, but it was nowhere on the cause of death. It was, she had 2 forms of metastasized breast cancer. She had MDS, which is a horrible blood disorder. And she had leukemia to the extent that the pathologist couldn't find any normal blood cells at all. Everything was leukemia. Wow. The hematologist said he had never seen anything like it in his life. She just got overwhelmed. And when I went to editors of newspapers here, literally crying, saying, why are you lying about my dear wife that died? She didn't die of COVID. They said, we don't want to hear about it. We don't want to hear. We understand she had Omicron. But I said, you wrote that she died of that disease, and it's a lie. They didn't want to hear about it. In fact, here in Israel, and I'm very angry. I'll calm down. I'm very angry that our government used this country, of all countries, as basically a bunch of lab rats for a trial that had none of the required aspects of a trial, informed consent being foremost amongst them, right? informed consent. They lied here. They told everybody that this mRNA vaccine had been approved by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. Never was. It still isn't. It's used for emergency purposes. It was a bloody global trial with us acting as the guinea pigs.
What do you think was the overall objective of this trial? Was it just for profits, or was there something more sinister at play?
Profits for sure. So let's leave that out of it. But yeah, I believe there was something more sinister involved. I do. Look, Bill Gates had a tetanus vaccine campaign in Kenya. Okay. Provided the vaccine. It was a brand new vaccine. Everything's fine. Well, guess what? Over 250,000 Kenyan girls were sterilized. 250,000. And the answer from Bill Gates was, oops. So either they want you hooked on the vaccine or whatever it is, for whatever purpose, and then you have to take it again and again and again until heaven knows what happens at the end. And you have legal sanctions, you have maybe even social sanctions brought against you. I was thrown out of a synagogue here. I was never vaccinated. I mean, no way. I'd go to jail before I was vaccinated. And I had a reason. My wife had zero immunity, Esther. And if I took the vaccine, how did I find that out? We came here and we went to her cancer team. And I said, are you guys all vaccinated? And they said, of course, three times, 4 times. I said, why are you wearing masks? And they said, oh, well, we're spreaders. And I said, what did you say? You're spreaders? You mean you're actually disseminating the virus? Yeah. So we have to protect ourselves because your wife has zero immunity. I said, bloody rotters. I said, you're all a bunch of bloody lying rotters for doing that. You're supposed to be doctors, and you're spreading what could be, who knows, a lethal disease. You're spreading a disease. You're a fucking grim reaper. That's what you are. And you sit there in judgment of me because I'm not wearing a mask and I'm not vaccinated because I care for my wife and I care for my private rights as a citizen to decide what goes in my body and what doesn't. They thought I was funny. They laughed at me.
Yeah, I find it extraordinary that you were kicked out of a synagogue as well, given...
No, do you know why? No, I was kicked out of a synagogue because they said, God will not listen to me. God will not listen to me.
Unbelievable.
So, look, what we saw was horrific, and I'm not talking about the so-called disease. I'm talking about what happened to society, how we became sheeple. That's what we were, sheeple. And the videos that I saw coming out of Australia, I was so angry. I remember the police barging into a home to arrest the mother. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah. And the children are screaming, and she's, the husband, what are you doing? What are you taking her for? What is this all about? And it was like bloody Nazi Germany, just like Nazi Germany. If any country that claims to be a democracy that engages in that kind of work deserves to be overthrown. You can't do that to people. This was a trial. A trial by definition is voluntary. And if it's voluntary, you at least need informed consent. But boy, all these governments just were operating off the same playbook. And they just bloody well did what they wanted, and people just went along with it. So people should be very careful about looking at the Germans during the Second World War and saying, oh, we would never do that. We would never just blindly follow some idiot. Well, sorry, folks, you did. You did. The diseases that have been spawned by this RNA vaccine, drug, are incredible. Why is it? I ask you this. Why is it that certain aspects of this mRNA vaccine have been declared classified? Why? I've never, growing up in the family that I did, I never even heard of anything like that. That part of a regular vaccine, a regular vaccine was classified. Why? Trade secret? Bullshit. That's what patents are for. Okay? Patents, that's what their patents are for. And you're putting this in me. People used to call me because they knew of my background and my father, and saying, should I take the vaccine? And I begged them, no, don't. Please don't do this. Please, just ride it out. Please. No, I lost a lot of friends because of that. They just went ahead. In New York, 10 Jewish men constituting a minyan, okay,
Which is a
with
prayer
masks,
gathering.
a
Just
prayer
for the
gathering,
benefit of our audience, yeah, it's called a
right,
minion is a
prayer
prayer gathering.
gathering, with masks, with social distancing, some with vaccination certifications. We're not allowed to pray. But a mob of 100,000 leftist maniacs could hold a demonstration with no masks, no vaccines, no
They
social
were
distancing,
immune from the
nothing.
virus according to the science. Quite miraculous.
Right. Amazing, wasn't it? Quite amazing. I mean, it was a miracle. It was a miracle.
Curious to know, what's your thoughts on 5G technology and its role or suspected role in the virus, or at least in making people sick?
Well, activating the virus because there are certain elements in the mRNA vaccine that can, in fact, be triggered by 5G frequencies. I honestly don't know enough about that to make an educated statement. I'm very leery of 5G technology by itself. Let me leave the mRNA, the particular Pfizer vaccine aside. I mean, the fact that it has some like graphene in it, some other elements in it where there's no need for, but it does happen to react with the 5G broadcast. I was with some friends of mine up in a city called Safed or Tzfat, where they just put up 5G antennas. And my friends, who are all electrical engineers, I'm a mechanical engineer,
Wow.
said we're gonna do some experimenting, and they had a radiation meter, a special radiation meter. We got within 100 meters of that 5G antenna, and that son of a bitch pegged in the red zone. It pegged all the way over on the right. The progressives always like to say they want to liberate people, and they want people to do their own thing. And it's a total contradiction. They're more Leninist than the Leninists were. They're more totalitarian than any of the previous totalitarian governments were. The progressives are dangerous. They say you can think anything you want as long as it agrees with me. The first public organization that was in favoring birth controls in the United States was started by eugenics progressives, not
Margaret
liberals.
Sanger.
Exactly. And, she was a racist. She wanted to reduce the population, the black population, the Southern and Eastern European population, immigrants coming into the United States. And free access to abortion was one of those ways of doing it. This is the mindset of the progressive, and everything flows from that. You are not smart enough. You don't have the right, et cetera, to make a decision on what's happening in your life. And that's whether it's a matter of consumer choices, lifestyle, even sometimes, free speech, all of these things. And now they're getting into medical areas. And that's what scares me the most. You want to shut me up and say I can't print something or I can't say something in public? Okay, I'll get around that by going and talking with my friends. But now you're saying shut up, get in the line and get vaccinated and get injected with something? No. If you have any self-respect as a human being, I'm not talking about a member of a ostensibly democratic society like Australia. you have to say, no, you don't do this to me. You don't have my permission to do this. And who knows what happens at that point, but I'll tell you something. I told Esther at the time, they'll have to put me in jail. I will not be vaccinated. I will not do this to myself. I will not voluntarily walk into the gas chambers. No, I will fight. So,
Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, not only did he greet you on the tarmac when you came to Israel for the first time, he also visited you when you were in prison, I believe, back in 2002.
right.
Are you still in touch with Netanyahu?
Yes,
Have you spoken
yeah.
to him since the whole COVID fiasco?
Well, when we got off the airplane, first of all, I was shocked to see him there because there had been an understanding that I would come in very quietly. And when the plane came in, I saw all the lights. And when the plane taxied and finally stopped, I looked out the window and I shook my head and I turned around to Esther. And I said, my God, the prime minister's out there. What am I supposed to say? I'm not prepared for this. And she said, I'm retired. It's on you now. So I did, God bless it. I didn't know what to do. So I came down the steps and yes, I kissed the ground. There's a backstory to that, which you might be interested in.
Sure.
And the first thing, apart from handing me my identity card, my Tudat Zechut, which is an identification card, was he said, we can do the vaccination right here for you and your wife.
Wow.
Right there. And
he offered you the vaccination. Wow.
Yeah, fucking 35 years in hell. Now you're going to fucking kill me right there. Okay, fine. Fucking execute me right there on the tarmac. Okay. I said, luckily I had gotten a good night's sleep coming over on the airplane. And by the way, after flying on a bespoke tricked out 737, I will never fly commercial again. I mean, this plane, this was Miriam and Sheldon Adelson's private business B737 business jet. I was horrified at the luxury in that place, but I definitely took advantage of it. I'm not ashamed to tell you this. I looked at him and I just got very serious and I said, Bibi, Prime Minister, Esther is not allowed to have the vaccine because she's has no immunity. She's zero immune. And I said, if I take this vaccine, I could give it to her. So he looked at me and thought about it and he said, okay, and I understand. Okay. As far as what I did when I got here, when I bent down and kissed the ground, let me quickly give you the backstory to that. When John Kerry was Secretary of State, Foreign Minister of the United States, he worked out a deal, a devil's deal, as I call it, with Israel, that if Israel released some of our worst terrorists who had, multiple life sentences, consecutive life sentences, if we would do that here as a confidence building gesture to the Palestinian Authority, I would be released from prison, but I couldn't go home. I couldn't go back to Israel. And there was some question as to whether even my body after I died would be allowed to be buried in Israel. So cabinet called in Esther and said, this is the deal. We'll abide by whatever Jonathan wants. Now, two things. Number one, some people have considered that decision to be unethical because here is a man that has no hope for the future and the door is being opened conditionally, but it's being opened. And there doesn't seem to be any other hope at the time for ever leaving prison alive. But Bibi knew me well enough to know that what the correct answer from my part would be. Okay. The other thing was, it never should have even been considered. Never. Leave that aside. Esther came to visit me and she said, this is the deal. I've been asked by cabinet to bring your answer back. But she said, before you answer, let me tell you something. If you decide not to take this deal and spend the rest of your life in prison, or you decide to take the deal and spend the rest of your life in exile, galut, in exile, never to return to Israel, I will stay with you in the midbar, in the desert, no matter what your decision is. And by the way, that quote from Psalms about I knew you when you were young in the desert is on her. I put that on her grave. So she said, what's your answer? So I said, no. She said, you have to give me a little bit longer answer than that because I have to brief cabinet and then the PM about this. So I said, okay, I'll give you a longer answer. Hell no. And she said, no. You know, you're a slightly educated individual. You're an officer, or were an officer. And give me an educated answer. So I said, okay, I reject this deal on 3 grounds. 1, it dishonors the victims. 2, it lowers deterrence because other terrorists will feel that they can commit atrocities and eventually get out with a deal like this. And thirdly, it would do irreparable harm to the victims' families. So I said, for those 3 reasons, I formally reject this deal. So she said, that's your answer. I said, yes. She said, well, that's a very fine answer, but it's not the Jewish answer. Esther was my, what we call Morah. She was my teacher. She was probably one of the most beautifully educated Jews I've ever run across, man or woman. I was told by several rabbis, prominent rabbis, that if she had been a man, she would have definitely received ordination. Smicha, as it's called. And I once asked her about that. And I said, how do you feel about that? And she said, I feel all right. She said, I hope to teach Jewish girls. So my life would be fulfilled from a professional standpoint. I don't need to be a rabbi for any reason like that. That aside, she said, your answer is a fine answer, but it's not the Jewish answer. She said, as Jews, we live for 3 principles. Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. Al pi Torat Yisrael, under Torah. And she said, if you agree to this deal, you will be making the same dreadful mistake the spies, the Meraglim, made when they cursed the land in order to keep their honor, their koved, in the midbar, in the desert. And she said, boy, we've been paying for that ever since. So she said, you only have one choice right now, and that's to understand that you will either be coming home as a body to be buried in Knesset Israel, to be buried in the sacred soil of Israel, or you will come home an old man, and the first thing you do is you get down on the ground and kiss the ground. She said, those are your only choices. So I said, that's the Jewish answer. And she said, yes. I said, then put my name on that. That's fine. And that's why when I came down the airplane, the first thing I did was kiss the ground. A lot of political cartoonists in Israel made hay out of that, as we say, by showing me kneeling in front of King Bibi. And it was actually pretty funny. It was actually pretty funny. So
I was wondering if we could go back a little bit. I was just curious because I know there's a lot of aspects to the case that you can't discuss, but keeping within the confines of that, your case always puzzled me because people that did a lot, that committed more severe crimes, including ironically Caspar Weinberger, who was involved in the Iran-Contra scandal and armed Iran against America.
Was pardoned.
And he was pardoned. He should have gone to jail for life. He was pardoned by the president. And he was a defense minister at the time, the defense secretary of defense. during your court hearing in 1985, and he intervened personally in your case. And the CIA, I believe.
Okay, let me just set the record straight for a lot of people that, maybe yourself included, that don't know this. First, the law. I was not indicted for intending to harm the United States. A lot of people don't know that, okay? What does that actually mean? Look, there is some information which is so dangerous, so sensitive, that if it's released to anybody, even the closest of friends, the Five Eyes, so to speak, that it could do irreparable damage to the national security, right? Okay. And if somebody did that, that person could have and should have been indicted with intent to harm the United States, because he should have known that this information should never get out of channels, secure channels. Okay. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, there's been a lot of crap and disinformation floating around, fake news, about what exactly I did. So I go back to my indictment. The indictment says very clearly, I did not have intent to harm the United States. By extension, that means the information that was involved did not rise to that level of severity where I could have and should have been indicted for intending to harm the national security. That's number one. Number two, why was this operation approved in the first place by the Israeli government? I was not recruited. I was a walk-in. Let's get that clear. They didn't come to me and say, help us, even though they knew about me. Why? Because I was on the Navy team that was part of the US-Israel Intelligence Exchange Agreement, a legal agreement, a treaty between two sovereign nations that somehow went off the rails in the United States. Why? The attack on the Iraqi nuclear reactor. Weinberger and the then
Who's not Jewish, by
deputy,
the way. I just want to make that
who is not
clear to our
Jewish,
audience.
who is not Jewish, who is not Jewish, and the then deputy head of the CIA, Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, swore blood revenge against Israel. It's a long story why, but what they did was they instituted what I called an undeclared intelligence embargo. Now, the Israelis knew that things were being cut off from them, vital information that should have been going to them as a matter of course, because of the US-Israel Intelligence Sharing Agreement. So I saw this in negotiating where my Israeli counterparts were saying to me, why are you bullshitting us? Why are you lying to us? We're giving you everything we were supposed to give you. Where is it coming back to us? Look, I went up what we call the food chain, asking the same question. And the answer I got was, on one piece of technology, let them lose a few airplanes, and then they'll figure out how to counter something. Well, I have family in Israel, and they could have been talking about one of my cousins in the Air Force. So I didn't like that. I didn't like my boss having an ashtray on his desk called Auschwitz. I didn't think that was funny. They didn't know I was Jewish, by the way. That's the funny thing. No one knew. They thought I was Lebanese, I guess because of this. They thought I was Lebanese. Seriously. So I went to, I offered myself because I just couldn't do nothing. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Look, I thought long and hard about what I was doing and the potential consequences before I crossed the line. And I felt, because of my upbringing with my uncle from the Voyage of the Damned, that my life was worth sacrificing for my people. All the information, all of it, involved in my case was information that should have been provided under the terms of reference of the Intelligence Exchange Agreement. There was a moment in Paris, in a safe house, where Rafi Eitan, my commanding officer, wanted to know the name of his American agents in Israel. And I categorically refused to compromise those names. And I said, that isn't what this operation is about. And he said, you'll be sorry for that because one of them is going to kill you. And guess what? One of them did. That's how I was caught. There was a CIA spy in the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee.
Wow.
And how did I find that out? He brought a case against the CIA in federal court in New York for inadequate retirement. And as part of his justification for asking for more money, he indicated that he was responsible for compromising me. Wow. So the judge, after reviewing all the information, said that he's a credible complainant, the information that he provided checked out, it's accurate, but he thought that the case should be considered in camera and not in public court because of the sensitivity of the information involved with spying on an ally. Does that sound familiar? Okay. Well,
the interesting part is, just for the benefit of our audience, you were never charged for treason. It was passing information on to an ally. And I believe there was a case involving Saudi Arabia, involving another individual, and I believe he avoided jail time.
He was a naval officer. Similar situation. And yeah, he provided a lot of information to Saudi Arabia. Wasn't even given a slap on the wrist, just taken out of the Navy. It wasn't even a dishonorable discharge, just retired from the Navy, and that was it. Look, it took me 20 years to get a document called the Victim Impact Statement. Every criminal case has one. And when I saw it finally, after 20 years, I understood why the government had denied me access to this document for so long. Okay, why? This document is the real source of truth as far as the damage I did. Forget all the rhetoric, the hype, the fake news. This is the real deal, so to speak. So what did it say? Two things. It said, number one, I provided Israel information that should have been provided on a quid pro quo basis. So basically, the United States didn't get any negotiating value out of it. But they weren't giving it anyway. They were violating the agreement, a solemn agreement with Israel. So let's leave aside the irony in that charge. The real meat of this document was the second charge. And they said that many of America's Middle East allies, one in particular, and I'm not going to go into the name of that one, but I think you understand how important oil functions in society, especially, industrial society like America, felt that I had made Israel too strong and that I should be made an example of. That was in quotes. That was in quotes, that I should be made an example of. And there was no harm to American security, none. Later, after I was sentenced, there was a Jewish reporter that asked the then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, like the defense staff, what the point of my sentence was. And the chairman, four-star general, was very candid. He said, it's intended as a lesson, as a warning to the American Jewish community to remember where their loyalties lie. No pushback. There was crickets, as we say, crickets from the American Jewish establishment. Look, for 6 weeks, I was renditioned. And I might have been the first one to have been renditioned. Bag over the head, taken to a undisclosed location. I don't know where it was. It was up in the mountains somewhere because my ears were popping. Maybe West Virginia, maybe Pennsylvania. And for 6 weeks, well, let's put it this way. I have 100% disability now. 100%. I have a plate in my head. My back is broken in 4 places. My ankles were broken. For those who are of a delicate nature, I would suggest you turn off this link right now. I was raped for 6 weeks. And what was this all about? Was it about catching my team members? No. It was about me signing a document that was filled with names, the names of Jewish leaders in the United States Jewish community. And what was I supposed to implicate them in? My intelligence activities. No evidence was asked. I was not told I would have to testify against them, and nobody would know, supposedly, who fingered them, who grassed them out, so to speak. And I looked at that list, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was something out of, Stalinist Russia.
The doctor's plot, yeah.
The doctor's plot, right after the Second World War. And I was raised again in a family where I was told I should never mossad another Jew. I could never rat on another Jew, no matter what they'd done. It was not permitted. So I realized I couldn't do it by character. I couldn't do it. And the other thing I realized was how dangerous it was to have a pen and a document and a weak person at that moment. So I just came to terms with myself. I came to peace with myself, and I said, I guess I'm going to die. I refused to answer that or to associate with that. So for 6 weeks, my day started with me naked, being chained to a chair and having a 2.5-inch fire hose directed at my genitals. And the beatings and the kickings and the slappings and everything else, proceeded. When my lawyers finally found me and brought me back, I had to crawl through this security court. I couldn't stand up. My ankles were broken. I mean, they were at an angle, like I was pigeon-toed or something. And I got up to the table and I pulled myself up. I won't describe what the pain was like. And the judge just looked at me and said, I'll be back in a few minutes. I have a call. You stand right there. You do not sit. So he came back in about an hour and a half. And he looked at me and he said, I understand that you slipped in the shower. Is that correct? I said, no, Your Honor, that's incorrect. I slipped twice. You always have to see the humor in things, right? I mean, you always have to, right? So, I mean, there was another moment that was kind of shocking for me. By the way, a very famous rabbi in Israel, Rav Avram Shapira, he's the head of a yeshiva called Merkaz Harav, a very nationalist religious school. Later found out about a Supreme Court appeal that I made once I got home, based on the fact that I learned that the Mossad knew exactly what they were doing to me. And they not only said nothing, but they basically encouraged my tormentors to go ahead and tear me apart.
Wow.
That was because I was working for a competing intelligence agency in Israel called Lakam. We reported directly to the Minister of Defense. So,
wow, that's news, because I was under the impression that you were working with Mossad.
No, I was never a Mossad agent. I was Lakam. I remember the first time I was given my code name. That was pretty funny. I was again in Paris, and they called me Danny Cohen. So I said, "What? How'd you get this name?" And they said, "Well, we had an Ellie Cohen in Damascus, and we have a Danny Cohen now in Washington." I said, "No, absolutely not. This is bad karma. You cannot give me this guy's name at all, because we all know how that ended." And basically, I told them I'm working in behind the lines. I'm working in enemy territory right now. If I'm caught, it's going to be really bad. I couldn't convince them. But I think one of the worst moments in this pre-sentencing period came when I still wasn't talking. And the team of investigators came back from Israel, and I'm, waiting for them. And they come in rather triumphantly and put a little box in front of me. And it was filled with documents that the Israelis had returned with my fingerprints on them. Thank you very much. So they said, the diplomats and the security people said, well, you don't need to talk. We've got you now. Life sentence, no question. Day for day, you'll die in prison. So have a nice day. And as they left, I started laughing. And the chief prosecutor turned around and looked at me and said, you crazy? What are you laughing at? And I laughed. I said, you think you got all the documents? And I just started laughing. I said, you guys are a bunch of rubes. I said, could I please go back to the jail right now? They're having a wonderful lunch of peanut butter and jelly, and I definitely don't want to miss that. So they were infuriated. I mean, they were absolutely infuriated. Look, there are two other aspects of this case that you have to understand, and it will make sense to you now when I tell you these things. The KGB, Fifth Directorate, ordered their two high-level moles, Aldrich Ames in the CIA and Robert Hansen in the FBI, to basically pin on me all the damage that they were inflicting on the CIA agent network in the Soviet Union. And to facilitate this myth or this story, the Soviets burned one of their own low-level agents in Israel to make it look like that was the link, where the documents came to Israel, and this low-level agent compromised the documents and got them back to Russia, and that led to this wholesale slaughter of not only American agents but British agents as well. It worked. It worked. I was told later by a prosecutor the following story. He said, do you remember when the judge asked you if you had any regrets for all the deaths you'd caused? He said, what did you do? What did you say? I said, yes, I have regrets, that there wasn't one more. So he said, where was your head? I said, my head was in Tunis. I was the Israeli intelligence officer that put together the intelligence package that facilitated the Israeli airstrike against the PLO headquarters in October '85.
Wow.
The objective was to kill Arafat. His bodyguard, 417, had just brutally murdered 3 Israeli civilians on board their sailing ship in Larnaca, Cyprus, and that was it. Everybody said, that's it, done. We get rid of this bastard now once and for all. And because of what was going on at the time in an area called the Gulf of Hammamet, it looked like a war was going to break out between Algeria and Libya. All these naval vessels from all over Europe, the Soviet Union, United States, there were 30 or 40 of them, were anchored there with their radars on. So I had to figure out how to thread the needle, so to speak, for the inbound airstrike. So the strike came in, and things happened. Arafat decided to stop at the gate and review his honor guard, just as the F-15s flew overhead and just basically wiped out his headquarters. And there were about 90 of his fellow travelers killed. So I looked at the prosecutor and I said, they'd already outed me on that I was the one that was responsible for this. And he said, well, I'll tell you where the judge's mind was. The judge's mind was in the basement of the Lefortovo prison in Moscow. I said, why? He said, because Aldrich Ames had just described for him how the KGB and actually it was the GRU fed General Trechikov, a CIA agent, into a furnace, feet first in front of his family. And
Wow.
There you are saying to him, I said, what have I got to do with that? He said, Ames fingered you with this. So when the judge came out and he asked you this question and you answered the way you did, all he was thinking of, this bastard, I'm going to burn him. He said, did you ever wonder why there was so much security in the courtroom? There were more armed guards in the courtroom than there were observers. I said, I couldn't figure it out. He said, the majority of the CIA's operations directorate, spies, field agents, had all volunteered to come in and cap me in the courtroom for what I'd done. That's
Wow.
why. So I said, I didn't have anything to do with this. He said, well, we know this now after Ames and Hansen were caught. And Senator Dennis DeConcini, who was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, wrote a bipartisan letter after they interrogated Ames, wrote a bipartisan letter to Bill Clinton, President Clinton, saying, you got the wrong guy, let him go. He didn't do this. But Clinton wouldn't do it because by that time they realized I had negotiating value, or so they thought. So they kept somebody knowingly who was innocent of the crime they suspected in jail for negotiating purposes. And by the way, the only time the word treason was mentioned was at my sentencing by Weinberger in his deposition. And the tribunal that reviewed my first complaint, appeal, it was a who's who of these three people. One of them was the most conservative judge on the Court of Appeals, Justice Stephen Williams, God bless him. May he rest in peace. A guy by the name of Lawrence Silverberg, who had just been the Inspector General of the CIA, and a woman by the name of Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Sounds
before
familiar.
she became the Supreme, right? And they all grilled the government, saying, how could the Secretary of Defense have accused this man, this defendant, of committing a crime that he was never indicted for and did not commit? So the government was backed up against the wall. It's in the record. You can read it yourself. And they apologized for the
That's
damage that
extraordinary.
might have been done. But they never took any remedial action. None. So, the Court of Appeals did this. So this was the Soviets. And by the way, many, many years later, I got called into the security office of the prison and said, here's a keep away, sign it. And I said, a keep away is a document that's used with a co-conspirator. I don't have any co-conspirators. So I said, who is this? They said, well, Aldrich Ames is coming here for medical treatment. There was a hospital associate. I said, I don't have anything against him. He did what he was told. He didn't know me personally. That's one issue. And you could talk for hours about the consequences of that situation. By focusing on me, they let guys like Hansen and Ames continue killing agents for 8 more years.
Wow.
They got me. We got a Jew. We just nailed Israel. They're responsible for all of this. Done. Okay.
Donald Rumsfeld and CIA Director George Tenet also interfered in your case, I believe, and they surely they knew the truth as well.
By the time they came along, yes, indeed. Now let me just finish the second part,
Sure.
which, okay, I was part of Iran-Contra, okay, from the Israeli side. I opened up all the bank accounts for both sides in Zurich at a bank in Zurich that's used by all the intelligence agencies. Okay. And the funny thing about it was I was on the road for 72 hours with my ex-wife, and I was being what they call deloused to make sure that no one was following me. So when we got to Zurich, and we were on the little street where this bank was located, it was a villa, basically. I looked down the road and I said, oh, God, look at this. All these single men sitting at tables reading newspapers. I mean, okay, you don't have to have been a witness, or have seen B-rated spy movies to know that they're posted right outside that bank. So I pulled the hat down. I did everything I was supposed to do. Well, I eventually got up to where the president of the bank was, and I hated him. He was handsome, he was fit, he was young. Okay, and he was, as we say in Texas, he had the shit. Okay, he was. I hated him. Okay, he was everything I wasn't at the time, and he was thin on top of it. Okay, so he asked me the drill. You are, and I couldn't remember who I was. I was so tired. I just couldn't remember which passport. I had 4 passports, so I don't know why I pulled out all 4. And I'm looking at them, and he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Please." So I put them on the table, and he picked one out, and he read the name. I said, "That's it. That's it." He said, "How long have you been on the road?" I said, 72 hours. He said, "Let me pour you a scotch." So Iran-Contra. So I opened up the bank accounts. When I was in Washington, I was asked to come up with a list of air defense equipment that could be sold to Iran for the defense of Karg Island that was just getting fucking hammered at the time by the Iraqi Air Force. And I wrote up a list at home on my own typewriter, unfortunately on a clean ribbon. Okay, bear that in mind. It was a clean ribbon of all of the options that were available at the time, including one that involved Israel trading its Hawk missiles for new iHawks from the United States. And the US could sell Israel's old Hawks through Spain to Iran, which eventually is what happened. Well, I'm the author. Okay. I'm arrested. I didn't have time to burn the tape, the ribbon. So they reconstructed the letter. And things got really dicey for me at the time. They want to know, what's this business about Karg Island? So this is before I was renditioned. So I said, could you please pass a message on to people in the National Security Council? And I said, tell them that I'm the guy that suggested the Raptor swap, Hawk Raptor. What do you want? I said, I want to leave. I want to go home. And I want my wife, well, ex-wife, released. Just put us on a plane at Andrews Air Force Base and I'll keep my mouth shut. That was the only card I had to play, right? 2:00 in the morning, my door opens electronically. I walk out. There's some funny looking guys in uniforms I'd never seen before. They called me down. They said, you're leaving. Go get changed out. Yeah, it worked. So I go down to what they call R&D, receiving and discharge. I switch into my suit. They cut my ID off. And I said, where am I supposed to go now? And they said, well, you're going to Andrews Air Force Base. You'll meet your wife there, going back to Israel. But you go out that door right there. And I looked at the door, and it was the officers' parking lot. And I just had a really bad feeling about that. So I asked them, I said, can I go to the bathroom? They said, yes. So I went around the corner and I ran as hard and as fast as I could. And I hid in a closet, a dirty clothes closet, for 2 days. And it was a character, I mean, it was a part of the anarchy that was in that prison. It was an inner city jail. I think I was the only white male that was in that prison, 5,000, 6,000 rather mean black guys that were in there. And finally I got hungry. So I came out, and my lawyers saw me later that day, and they had a copy of the newspaper. And apparently the FBI's hostage rescue unit was posted up outside that door with orders to kill the first person coming out of that door at that hour, dressed in a tan Brioni suit, because he was an armed inmate that was on the escape.
Wow.
So I read that and I said, oh, okay, this is getting kind of rough. Later, when the case broke, about a year and a half, 2 years later, one of the defense attorneys came to see me. He was the President Nixon's former, Len Garment, his former lawyer, counsel. And I'm sitting now in open population outside in a patio with my lawyer. And he says, here, and he shows me a newspaper from Monterrey, Mexico. He says, what do you think of that? I said, I don't read Spanish. He said, no, the picture. I looked at it. I said, it's a burned out Comanche, twin engine Beechcraft type Comanche aircraft with a burned out skeleton at the pilot's wheel. I said, boy, that guy got toasted. And I said, what happened there? And he said, well, that was your friend, Near. And he was coming back to testify on behalf of the government about what you boys were involved with. So he said, how's your memory? I said, not good. I don't recollect hardly anything. He said, well, you better keep to that because you walk the track every day, don't you? And I said, yeah. He said, well, the last thing you might see in your life is a glint of light in a tree line. So he said, you just keep that bad memory and everything will go well for you. And I did. I kept that bad memory. I never opened my mouth. I knew everybody involved. And frankly, between you and me, they were all patriots. Nobody was in it for money. Nobody. So when I went to tax court, after I was sentenced, they took me to tax court, which nobody knows about this in the United States. It's kind of like the Code Napoleon. You're guilty and you have to prove your innocence. So I'm sitting there and these three judges, no lawyer. I didn't have any legal representation. And these lawyers are looking at me rather, pityingly. And they said, we got this document from the bank called the Fiche Confidentielle that says you had authorization to open these accounts. You know who you opened them for, but you don't have any withdrawal rights. That's it. You just were a bagman. You just brought the money in. Okay. And they said, we want to know who you opened up the accounts for. Oh. I said, I'm sorry. I can't do that. They said, we know you didn't have, this is not your money. We know that. So just give us the names. No, I don't recollect. And they said, last chance. If you don't recollect, you own the money. Okay? It's a lot of money. Illegal money. I don't recollect. So I became a very rich man very quickly for about 10 seconds. And the penalties were horrible. And they dropped after about 20 years. It was a civil case. And I thank God that I never informed on anybody, ever. And I still haven't, and I still won't.
Wow.
When my own mother, may she rest in peace, was dying, and I begged them, please let me go see her for one last time. They said, fine, talk. I couldn't do that. So I said, could I write her letters, please? Because I didn't have any writing privileges. They said, sure, go ahead. So what does a son write a dying mother that he was very close to? I wrote what I could, 26, 27 letters. So she died. And 2 weeks after she died, the letters were all returned to me, unopened, undelivered. And the chief of security at the prison looked at me and she said, I don't know why they did that. There was no reason. There was no reason for them to do that. I said, sure, there's a reason for them to do that. I won't go into it, but I said, I'm sure there's a reason for that. So at one point, I had enough information to sink a lot of people in Washington, including the then Vice President of the United States,
Wow.
Herbert Walker Bush, and who was directly involved with everything that was going on. Also, he just kind of slid under the radar, by the way. He had a get out of jail card, I'll put it that way.
And he later became president.
And he later became president.
Wow.
These are all dirty, 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 rotten scoundrels. I mean, they're horrible people.
So let's just say you've upset some of the most powerful people in the world.
Oh, it's a miracle I'm still alive. The first prison I went to, in fact, was, I didn't even know it existed. And for me to have said that, that's really an incredible statement. It was about 150 meters down. And when I came to this facility, the warden was waiting for me. He looked at me and he said, look at the sky, breathe the air, look at the grass. The next time you come out of here, you'll be dead. And I don't know why I said this, but I just looked at him and I said, I don't think so. God runs the world, you don't. And he said, well, we'll see.
Wow.
So I spent 7 years it was like a 3 meter by 3 meter by 3 meter cell. The warden told me the only way you're getting out of here is if you talk or kill yourself. Well, Jews don't kill themselves. We buy retail. Thank you for laughing. That's my original joke. At any rate, so there's a bar over the door, right? So that you hang yourself. I used it for chin-ups. The light was never turned off. The little toilet was flushed 2 or 3 times a week when they remembered. I had a tiny little sink for a bird bath. I never left that room for 7 years.
Wow.
And I sat down on a concrete bed, slab, and I suddenly realized I don't have the strength to do this. I don't want to die. I don't want to kill myself. I can't talk. I won't. So I made the reacquaintance of God. Seriously. And I negotiated with him, kind of like Abraham. I'm not comparing myself, but it was kind of like if he could do it, I could do it. And I just said, if I do the following things and I don't do these things, save me. And he did. He saved me. And I came out much buffier than I was when I went in, despite a broken back and broken ankles. So finally, the day came. I was the 32nd guy in there. There were 31 other men there. I never saw them. Domestic terrorists, mafia, hitmen, just a whole plethora of just down and dirty people who had a very good reason not to talk because of what could happen to their families. So when I left, I looked down the hall and I said, where is everybody? All the lights are off. They said, well, you're the only one alive. Everyone else died.
Wow.
Killed themselves. Okay, so I came up into the light. That's how I describe it. After 7 years, I came up. It was 150 meters and the painfully slow elevator. It was to drill into the person, you're going to hell. So I came out into the light and there was the same warden. And sometimes I don't know when to keep my mouth shut. And I just smiled at him and I said, you see, God runs the world. I lost a tooth, punched the light out. And I just thought, this is the sweetest pain I've ever had in my life. I got this son of a bitch so mad he hauled off and hit me. Great,
Wow.
Great, wonderful. So when I got to the next prison, the head of security was laughing. And I said, what's so funny? I still have blood running down my face. He said, the warden charged you with incitement to riot. They're all dead. There's no one around except officers. You're shackled, handcuffed behind your back. You got a dog collar around your neck. He said, this is the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. He shredded it. He said, this is just stupid. He just shredded it.
With Bibi Netanyahu, seeing that you know him quite well, you're on very good terms with him. I mean, he's cast as a patriot. I mean, his brother Jonathan died when Mesiris Nefesh self-sacrifice, and he comes from a very patriotic family. What happened during COVID that he could turn on his people the way he did? What do you think was going through his mind?
Re-election, cementing his role as the savior of Israel, developing a persona that would transcend all the negatives that were floating around in the international community about him. Those three things were floating around in his head. No person who valued the lives of his fellow citizens could do what he did. No person, unless he had an ulterior agenda. And I just gave you basically three reasons that constitute that ulterior agenda. Did he honestly feel that what he was doing was right? I can't go inside the man's head, but I just know enough about him to know that he's a very smart and agile politician who understands that his character has been torn to pieces in the international community and here in Israel itself. The cases that were brought against him did a lot to tarnish his character and reputation. And I think saving Israel from this scamdemic was his way of redeeming his character, perceived character.
So he drank the Kool-Aid. He genuinely believes that he was
drank the Kool-Aid? That's he fucking drowned in it. Drowned in it. Very proud of what he did.
Do you think he realizes now, though, in hindsight, perhaps what he did was a mistake, to say the least?
No.
He still believes in it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times a murder, I was in prison with a lot of them, felt that what they did was justified, that they were right in doing what they did for whatever reason. I mean, a person by nature has a great ability to rationalize the irrational after a while.
Very.
And it takes a really strong person to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'll probably burn in hell for this. I wish I hadn't done this. We're not dealing with, I don't know of any politicians that will do that, that will basically come clean and say, I made a horrible, horrible mistake, and I beg your forgiveness. No.
It's not just politicians across the board.
Well, look, it's not just politicians. It's religious leaders. It's professors. It's across the board. Business leaders. It's across the board. It's across the board. But I focus on politicians. I focus on politicians because they're the ones implementing these policies, forcing these policies, these inhumane decisions, rather, down on the electorate's throats. So does he have doubt? No. Does he wish that maybe that he could reconsider? No, he can't. He's fighting in court for his character right now. For him to come out and say now, even if he believed it, I did wrong. Oh, they'd burn him. They'd burn him at the stake. He can't say it. He has to ride this demon straight down to hell. That's what's going to happen. To do what they did here, to do what he ordered done here, after the Holocaust, I mean, especially after the Holocaust, to turn this whole country into one big collective guinea pig, lab rat? And why classify all of the harmful side effects unless you know that it's not going to go well when people see exactly what this damn drug can do? So, no, he's not going to apologize. Nobody is going to apologize here at all. There was one guy who was the head of this Briley vaccine that I wanted to take part in the trials that came out with the truth. And they shut him down immediately. Look, I actually saw hell, and I wasn't in prison. When Esther was dying, yes, she had Omicron, but they needlessly put her in the COVID ICU, intensive care unit. And all the doctors were begging the person in charge of that unit, please just let her die in a room by herself with her husband. Please don't put her. They were begging this guy, all these doctors, senior doctors, begging him, please. She has a day or two to live, please. No, rules are rules. Sound familiar? Like Nuremberg, maybe? Right. So as they wheeled her into the ICU, she was screaming for me. Please don't let me die alone. Please. What could I do? They have armed guards in front of the ICU. So I just sank to my butt and I pulled out the Psalms. And I said, I guess when she's dead, they'll come out and tell me. And all of a sudden, the door opened and there was the new head of the ICU, a nurse. And she had worked in a hospice, believe it or not. So she said to me, Jonathan, what are you doing on the floor? I said, I can't come in there. And she said, I make the rules here. Come, we'll dress you out. It was an Army nuclear biological chemical suit that I wore.
Wow.
Not a paper gown and a plastic mask. I mean, this was the real deal. I didn't know what I was going to see. And she said, you understand, you're in here until she dies. You can't leave. I said, I understand. Well, when I passed through that last barrier door, I walked into hell. It was like something out of a Hieronymus Bosch nightmare. I didn't know where I was. Like, what level of hell am I at? You know, Dante never stopped on this floor. And I finally found her, and she just threw her arms around me. So I pushed her bed in the corner and put a screen up. And I told the staff, we all know how this is going to end. So I will take care of her. Well, people were screaming for their wives, screaming for their husbands, screaming for their mothers, dying, gasping. And I held an Arab woman's hand who thought I was her son. And I tried to comfort her. But didn't do any good. She died. So finally, you know, Esther was going. And she said two things to me at the end, I guess, that are worth reporting. One of them, she said, is marry her. This is my current wife, Rivka. Wow. They were very good friends. And she had actually done the shidduch in the hospital, the engagement in the hospital.
Wow.
When she was still in between us. Rivka lost her husband. He was a Chabad rabbi, leaving her with 7 children. And I was going to lose my wife. I looked at Esther and I said, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she said, I'm not going to make it. And I want you to be happy. Who does this? So I promised her. Then she said something typical of her. What is politics? I said, what? She said, when I go, they're coming for you. And by that, she meant the politicians. She kept them all at bay. She was the gatekeeper to let me do my work. So she said, when I'm gone, they're coming for you. So again, I ask you, what is politics? And I said, sweetheart, you're not going to live long enough for me to give you the full academic definition. So she laughed kind of mirthlessly. And she said, well, I'll give you the short answer. Politics is the art of compromise. What are you willing to compromise? The people's safety, the people's trust, the people's love, the people's respect, the Maharach HaMachpelah in Hebron, Tekoa, the Temple Mount, Kashrut, Shabbat. What are you willing to compromise? And I said, nothing. I can't compromise on any of that. And she said, remember that when they come for you.
Well,
Remember that. And then I counted every breath. Until there weren't any more. So she shouldn't have died in hell. The doctors were willing to let her have a room with a balcony so she could see the country. But these bastards who ran this COVID program had no mercy. They had no heart. They had no sense of decency, common fucking bloody decency. So, yeah, I have pretty strong feelings on this issue of COVID. Very strong. They made my wife die in hell. And they made me watch it. And here, you won't believe this, they were vaccinating children in school without their parents' knowledge. Think about that. Think about that.
With the
without their
mRNA,
knowledge.
the COVID shot, you mean, or just the standard
Yeah.
the COVID shots? Wow.
Yeah. Children.
Wow.
We have a right to condemn Mengele? Excuse me. What did we do to our children? We won't know until years down the road. We sterilize them? I don't know. We give them a ticking molecular time bomb? I don't know. Did we do something to their cognitive abilities? I don't know. Children. We have a sacred obligation to protect these children. And that's it. We just rolled over.
Considering the gravity of what's happened, especially to the children in Israel, Eretz Israel, in Australia, and other parts of the world, is there a hope? Do you have a message of hope to the rest of the world, particularly to Australians who endured some of the worst COVID restrictions?
I was a classics minor in university. Okay, and I learned that hope was the last demon out of somebody's chest. It was the last demon. And I never understood the meaning of that metaphor until much later in my life. Hope? No. I don't know if a cure for this time bomb can be developed. I don't know if it's possible because they obviously developed it in a way where it couldn't be neutralized. Couldn't be neutralized. So if you were, and I use this word with love, if you were effing stupid enough to take that vaccine, then at least have the decency to prevent it from being used going forward. You made a very bad choice in taking that drug. You made a very bad choice. Make sure it doesn't continue. That's the least you can do to make amends for permitting it to just run rampant and torture an entire country. Make amends. Stop it from being used again. I don't know, hope, Pandora, you talked to Pandora about that. But as I said, it was the last demon out of her chest. And you have to think about that. Why? Why was it considered a demon? Why? Because there's such a thing as false hope. And unless you can bring yourself to say, yes, I stood by and did nothing while my next door neighbor's door was kicked in and his wife was taken out in front of her screaming children, and I did nothing, unless you can get on your hands and knees and beg forgiveness from that man and his wife and his family for your cowardice, then you have no hope in anything then. Unless you can look at your children and beg forgiveness for them for letting them take that vaccine, or I can't use that term, that drug, then there's no hope for you either. What happened in Australia was, I keep using this word, but it's the only word I have to describe the situation. You all allowed a beautiful democracy to descend into a level of dystopia that not even the greatest science fiction writers could come up with. You're a wonderful country. You have great people, independent people. Show me an Aussie and I'll show you somebody that can think for himself. I thought that was the case. I thought that was the case. A nation of diggers. A nation of diggers? Yeah, you buried your self-respect. You buried your national honor. And in too many cases, you buried your fellow citizens. You got nothing to hope for. Nothing. You let it happen. I'm not asking for revolution. I'm not asking for rebellion. It just say, no. Not in my house, not in my body, not in my neighbor's body. You bloody well have to walk over me in order, or shoot me in order to get to my neighbor or to get to me. Sweden, think about this. They didn't go through this stupidity. Look, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? That's what we're taught. This whole thing was just one nightmare, self-inflicted nightmare. It violated the procedures that were used, violated every public health rule that's ever been created, ever. If they had said to people, this is a trial, you will be informed about the dangers, the risks, and the possible benefits, and if you wish to join, fine. They didn't do that. There was no informed consent, and they're still lying to this day about the side effects that happen and about the actual nature of the drug itself. Please give me a break. Can't people wake up and understand what's going on? This is not, take the red pill and, you'll be enlightened. This is take the red pill and, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. You're a brave nation. You were a brave nation. I don't know what happened just now. It's not the Australia I came to love and honor and respect when I lived there. I didn't recognize Australia at all. I didn't recognize the nightmare I saw unfolding on the videos that I saw. I kept looking at Esther saying, where is this? I don't recognize this country. I love this country. It was a wonderful place. People are great. What happened? I don't know. Collective insanity? I don't know. The government should be held accountable. I will say that. Every public health official, every politician, every legislator that signed off on this, whatever it was, should be held accountable to some degree. I don't know what form that would take, but it better be a powerful deterrent for the next time these individuals think they can get away with this. I wish my father was still alive today, because he could speak more authoritatively to this subject. He was in charge of a swine flu vaccine program back in the 70s. I came back from the Middle East, I'm a naval officer, not feeling too well. And my mother, may she rest in peace, said, your father wants to see you down at the local TV station. Okay, and went down. And there he was with all the mucky mucks, the great mucky mucks of Centers for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, whatever, public health officials right and left. He said, sit down to me on TV, sit down. I said, okay, roll up your sleeve. What? Roll up your sleeve. I rolled up my sleeve. And he looked in the camera and he said, I believe in this vaccine so much that I'm going to inject my youngest son with it.
Wow.
And he injected me. And he injected me. And I looked at him, my mother said I looked like a deer caught in the headlights. And I said, what the did you just do to me? I didn't agree to this. Well, they cut it at that point. And later that night, I ended up in the ICU. Double pneumonia, both sides.
Wow.
I felt for 2 months like I was breathing through a straw. And after I came home, I found out that my father had quit vaccine R&D. 8 people had died from that vaccine, and they terminated the project. Think. I want you to think now. Seriously, I want you to think about this for 1 second. 8 people died, and they canceled the program. Will we ever know how many people died in agonizing, prolonged death because of this drug masquerading as a vaccine that was rammed down our throats? 8 people died in this trial. 8 people. And they said it was 8 people too many. And they stopped the vaccine trial. Did you hear anybody say that about this situation that we just went through? Never.
It's constant
Quite the
gaslighting.
opposite. Gaslighting. And mugging also. And mugging what they did. And Fauci, I mean, there's so much evidence already on the record that he's lied through his teeth, especially with gain of function. Gain of function. You know, everybody's been talking about, well, the Chinese government must have done this. You know, well, what the Chinese government did after the disease got at whatever happened is one thing. But Fauci and his friends were responsible for funding and not supervising the gain of function tests that never should have been done in that Wuhan lab. Never should have been done. Look, why is it that so many people came down with antibodies for AIDS after taking this drug? Because some people think right now that the actual work that was being done on these coronaviruses was to make it basically a vaccine for AIDS. Okay, fine. You want to believe that? You can believe that. You know, fine. But these are the facts. There are antibodies to the human immunodeficient virus, HIV, in a lot of people that were, injected, or I say infected with this drug. Why? Nobody's asking that question. How did this happen? How did this happen? Nobody's asking this question. And I hate to say this, but we're going to need eventually a replica of the Nuremberg trials to get to the bottom of what happened. Yeah, the Nuremberg trials, where you're going to hear doctor after doctor after doctor pleading the same effing defense that the Nazis used at Nuremberg. I was just following orders. What did you want me to do? I thought it was the right thing to do. You did? Really?
When I hear about people like Fauci in high positions who commit acts of unspeakable crimes, malfeasance, I always wonder what else are they capable of? That's going down a real rabbit hole.
Look, I grew up with a lot of these guys. They're friends of my father's. They were all friends. And they're very pleasant. These are the same guys that managed places like Auschwitz, day job, and came home loving husband, loving father to children, perfectly normal individuals, beasts, animals, devils, but you'd never know it. That's the
It's
problem.
scary.
That's the problem. Look, I remember one time my father said to me, "Do you want to see what I do for part of my living?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, we're going down to Mexico. I just developed a vaccine for a pharmaceutical house. And we're going down to arrange for trials." Okay. I was on break from university. So we traveled to Mexico City. We get out of the cab and we stare at this building. It's an orphanage. Think about that. It's an orphanage. And my father didn't know whether to go forward or back. And I just kind of pushed him. I said, "We're here. We might as well go in." So we talked to the director, and this is what the director said: "You can have any of the children you want. You can do anything you want. We don't care. They're at your disposal." And my father looked at him and said, "What? I'm here to run a formal clinical trial. You're telling me to commit murder against these? I don't know their medical backgrounds. They're not capable of informed consent. They're children." So my father kind of staggered out of this place with me, and he went to a payphone. That tells you how long ago it was. And he called his friend that was the president of this pharmaceutical house and just let loose. And my father finally slammed the phone down. And I said, what did he say? He said that the vaccine belongs to them, not me, and that they'll get somebody else more agreeable tomorrow to come in and administer the trials in this facility. And that was my introduction to what my father used to do for a living. One of the things that he did. Whenever you take liability away from any company, I don't care if they make fucking Legos, widgets, I don't care. When you take liability away, you give license for the most reckless behavior you could imagine. This is why here in Israel, when the rabbis were convinced, they don't know. Pardon my text. They don't know shit from Shinola. And they're told by the last guy that comes in, no, do it. It's good. It's for the people, good. The guy's fucking 90 years old. They don't even know what fucking planet they're on. And they say, okay, they don't understand that under Jewish law, if there's no liability, you can't authorize it. Because Jewish law, halacha, is all about personal responsibility. If there's no accountability, if there's no liability, you walk away.
There's also
Under Jewish
conflicts.
law.
There's also conflicts of interest as well.
Massive conflicts of interest. Massive. That's
also
yet
goes
another
against
issue.
the principle of Jewish law.
Correct. So I had a lot of respect for certain rabbis here until they started coming out with orders for the communities, their various communities, to take this drug. Life is hard. It really is, because it forces you to be responsible, not just to yourself, but to your fellow citizens. And nobody said it would be easy, but you have to make it so. And hopefully, God willing, Australia will never ever go back to what we just witnessed. You're too good of a country. You're too good of a people to let yourself fall back into that nightmare. You can't do this. You just can't do it. All the diggers that died in the First World War, all the Australian soldiers that died heroically in the Second World War fighting for democracy are literally crying right now over what just happened. Honor the sacrifice of your men and women that fought, dying for your safety and security. Don't dishonor them by embracing what they were fighting against. Amen.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's been an honor, and we would love to have you back on.